Welcome to the OFM podcast where metabolism matters. And I'm your host, Peter, but I'm in conversation with one of our key ambassadors, Jeff Browning, Bronco Billy. And we're going to be talking about now over a decade of being on OFM is the main topic, but we'll probably go down several different tangential rabbit holes in the process. So Jeff, you're getting ready for Western States, but you're coming off of a very competitive Cocodona 250 run. So take it away.
Yeah, just trying to recover, getting recovered right now. I'm back to training for the last maybe 10 days solid, back to normal kind of training. I had kind of a 3 weeks. I took pretty mellow, had a kind of a really tight right hip, which gave me some sciatica type symptoms. Had to do some body work and foam rolling and mobility, kind of daily foam rolling to keep on top of it. Was able to bike and hike and maybe run 2 or 3 days a week, really short and easy as testers. And I just kept having minor flare-ups, and then I would have to get on top of it and be back on the bike. And I'd try to run a couple days. So finally got on top of that. And now I've been back kind of training for 10 days. So was in the canyon last week in the heat, did some long runs, put in an 80-mile week last week. So at 4 weeks after the race, I was back to like legit long runs. And yeah, now I have like this week is my last one, and then I taper. So we're almost ready to taper after this Friday. So I'm 3 weeks out this coming Saturday. 2 weeks out this coming Saturday. And trying to focus on diet right now. Strategic carbs, because I'm back into volume training. So typical OFM protocol. So I am recovering and that kind of thing. And the other thing I've been kind of playing with this after Cocodona, I had some kind of issues the last third of Cocodona. I felt great from a fitness perspective, but I had some major edema issues. So like major swelling during Cocodona. And I kind of spent about 2 weeks sleuthing it out afterwards. And I think I've kind of found I'm doing some experimenting with some nutritional stuff during long runs to hopefully kind of head that off at the pass. I went back like 10 years to when I first did OFM in the first like 16, 17, 18, those first 3 years. Went back to some of like, what was I doing nutritionally? Thanks to my crew chief, George. He told me, hey, go back to your notes, see what you were doing when you were first kind of doing OFM. He goes, I don't remember giving you so many carbs during races. And sure enough, I went back and looked at some of the stuff I was doing and analyzed kind of those approaches. And I was having really good success back then. And the last few years, I've had a couple of issues in long races with edema. And interestingly, and I know this is kind of a rabbit trail here, but I think that listeners will kind of appreciate kind of where I'm going with this. And I think it might help some people. It's been something big in our coaching business that we've gone down this rabbit trail, and I've got some athletes testing it right now in training. I'm testing it in training, but getting enough, like actually thinking about a protein strategy, a bioavailable protein strategy during these long endurance events, 100 milers, 200 milers. When you get to the long distance, that's going to be more than 10 or 12 hours, the need for protein. So let me kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Most people are going to really focus on carbs and just taking a ton of carbs, as many carbs they can handle per hour, right? And the beauty of OFM is that we don't have to take copious amounts of carbs per hour. And I think there's some really cool, research data coming out right now, even in the high carb camp. One of them would be Paul Booth, who works with Evoke, and Scott Johnston, and works with Tom Evans and Ruth Croft. He's got an unpublished study that's about to be published that's comparing 90 grams an hour of carbs to 120 and showing that there's no performance difference from 90 to 120 except GI stress, and there's still GI stress in the 90 gram group. So when we go back to the beauty of OFM, we don't even have to do 90. We can do like 40, 50, 60 grams an hour.
And that's as an elite racer.
As an elite racer, yes. Yeah. My middle, the back of the packers, we're doing more like 40 to 50 grams per hour. We're finding that the sweet spot, we have a few that are really doing low, maybe 30, but most people are pretty good about 40 or 50. When I say 40 or 50, I'm personally at racing level in 100. I'm shooting for I'm going back because I had let my carbs creep up, which I think because, and I was not doing as many BCAAs as I used to. So branched chain amino acids, which, helps support muscle breakdown. And one of the reasons my theory on edema is that, and this is like supported with some research out there, if you're willing to dig into it. But one of the things that I experienced at Cocodona or what I'm experiencing, I think, is as I get muscle breakdown in this long race, and I'm primarily taking carbs during the race, that you start to get you don't have any circulating protein in the bloodstream in the form of albumin. So protein converts to albumin into the bloodstream and circulates in the bloodstream, and it acts as a metabolic sponge to pull fluid back into the bloodstream to be filtered from the tissue. So as we get muscle breakdown, that oncotic pressure loosens with no circulating protein and starts to leak fluid into the tissue, and you start to get edema. And as that edema gets worse, let's say you don't get good circulating protein to pull it back in, and this continues to happen. This is what happened to me. I didn't have a lot of good bioavailable protein. I was eating protein like solids, but you're not really breaking that down because it's too complex during exercise. So what was happening to me is I continued to slowly gain more and more swelling and, systemically. And then at some point, that's not only happening, visually to your hands and legs and arms and face and everywhere else, it's also happening internally, which it's also happening, like, say, in your GI. And what I experienced in the last third of the race was some pretty major GI stress, which I've kind of self-diagnosed at this point to exercise-induced leaky gut, to where the junctions, you have so much swelling that the junctions in your gut loosen and start to leak endotoxins in your bloodstream. And then you have major GI, and it's hard to recover from that in the race. So then it kind of derailed my race. I was like not motivated to race at all. I was just trying to survive. I hiked the last 30, I had a lot more stop time, 17 hours of stop time this year compared to 2024 was 6 hours. So like I ran a really good first 150 and probably a really poor last 100, to be honest, because of that. It just like derailed my race. And I was like, okay, that's happened on the Colorado Trail during the FKT attempt. And when I got the FKT on the Colorado Trail 2 years ago, and it happened here, and it's happened in the end of some hundreds in the last couple of years. So when I went back and analyzed, one of the things I was doing in the early days of OFM, and be patient, bear with me here, 16, 17, 18, I was taking high dose BCAAs, which helped support that muscle breakdown system. I was also chugging whey protein in the form of a recovery drink that was a high protein whey drink whenever I saw crew. So I was getting a big dose of whey protein, which is super bioavailable. Your body recognizes it, knows how to metabolize it. It starts to metabolize in 15 minutes into your bloodstream, and you probably get full absorption in about 60 to 90 minutes. So it's not something like burger or eggs or something that's way more complex. It's hard for your gut to deal with. Remember, we're losing 80% of our blood flow to the gut during exercise. So like, this is the beauty of OFM, is that you don't have to take 90 grams of carbs an hour or 120. You only have to take a drip of carbs to keep that glucose in there, to keep your fat oxidation kicked on, and just to give you tell the brain everything's okay. But we're really not metabolizing, you're not really utilizing that many carbs. Most of it's sitting in your gut when you're at 90 or 120. So And even that, we're seeing that in the studies that are starting to come out. So that pendulum that swung all the way to like 150 grams an hour or something is starting actually to swing back now, which I knew it would. I've seen that. I've raced high carb for 15 years before I did OFM 10 years ago. So one of the things that I think that's important here is that when I was looking back, I realized, one, I was mainly doing liquid carb calories, right? Drinking carb calories. I wasn't doing a ton of solids. I wasn't doing a ton of gels. I was only doing strategic carbohydrates around my heart rate going up on a climb. And if you remember, Peter, way back when we first started working on that, that's one of the things you told me. It was like, hey, just use the gels around big climbs when your heart rate's gonna go up, right? And your
energy demand goes up.
Exactly. So that's one of the things I went back. Like, here's an example. If anyone's familiar with the Western States course, I went back to my notes at Western States when I was in the top 10 for 4 years. I was only carrying from Robinson Flat to Michigan Bluff. Okay. That's a 25-mile section on the course. Okay.
And it's a hard one.
And a hard one. I was only carrying 2 gels. Only for the climb sections. There's 2 big climbs in there, right? There's two climbs in that section. And all I was doing was using it at the base of the climbs. And then the rest of the time I was going on just GU Roctane, which is a high BCAA, like 1,400 milligrams of BCAAs per liter.
And a trickle of carbs. Yep.
And 45 grams of carbs per bottle or per liter drink rate. That was it. Plus my electrolytes, right? So that when I went back and analyzed that, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go back to like a little lower carbs, like I used to, more liquid carbs and strategic gels, but I'm going to start messing around with not only drinking that carb drink again, but one of the things I've been messing around with is one of the things you'll experience if you're OFM and you can go, back off on your carbs quite a bit and you're just doing mainly liquid carbs. One of the things I have experienced during racing is kind of an empty gut feeling, meaning it's kind of annoying. Like, the growly stomach, like empty, feeling very empty in your gut. And it's kind of annoying during the race. So one of the things I used to do is just carry some banana chips and pop 2 or 3 banana chips to settle the stomach down. But one of the things I've been messing around with in this training block is finding a exogenous ketone, BHB. So the ketone salts, which gives you a bump in salt, which is good for a heat race. But there's a brand, I've been talking to Go BHB, that company, who's like an ingredients company, and then they kind of give their BHB product out to a bunch of different product companies that produce products for ketone salts. And I've been messing around with a whey protein bar that I'm taking 1 bite, like every 30 minutes of whey, to get that whey into the bloodstream so that converts to albumin. Then that albumin will be circulating in the bloodstream to help with edema and pull fluid back into the bloodstream from the tissue. So that a little bit, we're talking like 3 grams of whey protein and maybe 5 grams of carbs and a little and some BHB trickling in every 30 minutes during the race. So that gives me another fuel source, some ketones, exogenous ketones, just a drip of ketones, not very big, but it also gives me more salt too.
Well, that's the big thing with the growly stomach is when you're racing like that, you're putting out a net acid load. You're not acidic, but you're putting a net acid load on your stomach, and then the salt, it's mostly the salt counteracting that net acid load. Because I'm not a racer. I've been doing a lot of long stuff in the Sierras, and I'm doing them fasted on Vespa, salt, and water. But the key is keeping that salt going.
Yeah, right. And the salt, actually, and I'm a pretty salty sweater. I've been tested. I've had the precision hydration test. I've also have the H-drop wearable device, which is calibrated to that medical grade precision test. And I'm finding that my dump rate is, depending on effort, is anywhere from about 1,000 milligrams per liter in my per liter sweat rate, 1,000 milligrams of sodium to 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So I don't need to replace 100% of that, but I need to replace like 80 to 90% of that. You do reabsorb some in your skin when it dries on your skin, the sweat, the sodium.
Yeah, and you have a big reservoir of sodium in your liver and your bones to tap into. That's why it doesn't have to be exact.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody in our group about this. It's like, I remember when I first started this back in 2010, I was working with Duncan Callahan when he was winning Leadville.
Yeah.
And when I got him doing full OFM after that season, he says, I'm not burned out anymore. I want to keep racing. Like in October, November, he was like feeling good. And I said, yeah, that's because I really think that athletes truly deplete themselves over a summer of racing. And mostly it's demineralization of their liver and bone things. And that's why I tell people don't pre-hydrate before a race. Just drink to thirst. Don't go crazy, because you're going to deplete, most people when they pre-hydrate, they drink too much water, not enough sodium, and then they pee out those reserves. Right.
Yeah. One of the things I do too, on the subject of pre-hydration in races and events, I do a pre-sodium load. So like I use maybe do like, say, in a 20-ounce bottle, 1,000 milligrams of sodium. So an electrolyte profile in that bottle.
Like an LMNT.
Yeah, like LMNT or Redmond Relight. I personally use Relight. And then I just sip on that bottle the night before a long run, and the morning of a long run, I do another bottle, and I try to finish it an hour before, so it has time to absorb. I'm not because if you push that bottle right up to the start, then your body will go, I can't deal with this. And
you go start peeing. Yeah. I got a better one for you.
Yeah. What's that?
A better one. So what I recommend to athletes is 2 nights out, they have the medium rare steak and loaded baked potato. Right?
Yep.
Get the iron.
I do the same thing still.
Right. Just like I told you back then. But on the night before, if you like sushi, I tell people 2 bowls of miso soup for the sodium bolus, and then sushi to satiation, because the sushi rice and the fish, that's got sodium in it too. And so you get the resistant starch in the rice.
Yep.
You get a little bit of protein, but you want to keep it light because you're racing the next day. Because I found that the steak the night before, you feel fine, but it's too much.
It's too much. This is an interesting point too. One of the things and we haven't talked about this actually. So it's interesting that we're talking about this because we're, for me personally experimenting on my own, one of the things I found is I go low fiber.
Absolutely.
And the day before the race. So I do that, you're talking about, the steak and the heavier big meal, a lot of fat, a lot
2 nights out.
Yeah. 2 nights out. And then the day of, I stick to eggs, cheese, raw dairy for me personally, because I love raw dairy. I love raw milk. And then
that's when you were talking about the whey, I was thinking, and Michael uses raw milk in his races. And I'm like, that's both are a good strategy for giving you that
totally
human drip.
Yep. And then I'd either do chicken or fish and eggs.
You like sushi, right? You
like
sushi.
I do like sushi.
So if you're traveling, just make it easy. 2 bowls of miso soup, because that's a sodium bolus like crazy. And then sushi to satiation, because you're probably like me. If you start eating sushi, it doesn't stop.
Totally. Yeah. I don't stop with sushi. I love sushi.
So, but that's a really good pre-race thing, and you don't break the bank because you got to stop before you get over full.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's what I found. And the other thing I found for just as a tip, if you do no fiber the day before the race and you want to be regular the next morning, and this is something you want to experiment with on the night before your long runs to get the right dose for you, but just using like a magnesium gluconate powder or magnesium taurate or magnesium citrate, like Natural Calm or something like that powder in a
magnesium
drink.
citrate you have to be very careful with. That's one of the more potent laxatives of
that's what I'm talking about. But you're using it like a laxative, to make sure, because of your lack of fiber that day. So like just making sure that you're regular in the morning, but I use magnesium gluconate because it's not quite as
citrate is pretty hot. Citrate's hot. I use sodium chloride mainly because two reasons. It's the cheapest form of sodium or magnesium out there. And the reason it's the cheapest form of and it's very well absorbed, and you get the chloride anion as well as the magnesium cation. But you also, people don't know this, but magnesium chloride is more common on the earth than sodium chloride. So I figure that's the form of magnesium we actually co-evolve with more than anything else. It doesn't take away from gluconate, malate, glycinate, all the onatate, threonate, all those other ones are just fine. You have to just watch it with citrate. Oxide's not very well absorbed, and sulfate is Epsom salts, and you just want to use those with a bath. So that, but I was going to say the same thing is in the nights before, take magnesium with your meals. And that's another thing that I've been thinking for years. And this was back when we first started working together, was, magnesium is one of the things I first figured out. Magnesium, vitamin D were the first two things I figured out. People were just, if you weren't proactive on it, you were deficient. And with magnesium, it's not just that our diets have moved from being less magnesium rich, but our diets have also moved towards having more carbs in them for most people, which depletes magnesium very quickly. But also a lot of, like when you're eating OFM and you're training a lot, you're eating a lot of calcium rich food. So eggs, meat, fish, dairy, those are all super calcium rich. And so the calcium to magnesium ratio gets screwed up. So I'm finding that I'm putting a lot more magnesium in because I'm having so many calcium rich foods.
Right. You mean you're supplementing magnesium?
Yes, because the ratio of calcium slows gut motility, whereas sodium and magnesium speed it up. I actually supplement magnesium, daily magnesium. It's one of the, like, in my I have kind of a stack I do of supplements that it's one of those in the stack. Yeah. So what I do is I'll increase my magnesium when I know I'm not eating a lot of non-starchy vegetables, right? Or fruit that has, if I know my fiber's down, I definitely up the magnesium.
Yeah. And I do get a lot of fiber though, because I'm in training most of the time. I'm in some kind of a training cycle most of the season or most of the year. I'm typically really sticking to that OFM strategic carb idea, and I'm using fruit as my main strategic carb. So like I'm getting fruit with fiber, right? So I'm getting like apples and oranges and mangoes and stuff like that. So I am getting a good like amount of fiber coming through. Besides veggies, I'm doing veggies too, but usually only veggies, like 2 of the 3 meals a day are getting veggies. Usually one's only fat and protein, and another one's like protein and veggies, and then a strategic carb.
No, that works out really well. And this is the beauty of, like, what I love about what I do is I look at what we're doing with OFM as a collaboration. Like, it's a big collaboration, like with you, Peter, Andrea, Mike now, we're building all this knowledge base on how to do it. But the only problem is everybody on the outside who doesn't get it per se, they just automatically default to keto. Like, they think we're keto. And that's one of the things we need to make clear here. If you're new to our podcast or new to talking about, we're not keto by any means. And like you say, there's a lot of carbs in there.
A lot of carbs. And I think that the other thing that people don't think about in this approach personally is that one, we're only using keto for a short window to get your metabolic pathway to burn onboard fat open, right? If you've never done it before. So you're learning how to eat keto for a month, and then you're like,
yeah, you do a metabolic.
Then you're bringing carbs back and carbs on your long runs. But also, I think after that, keto is only a tool. And I would say what I actually coach people to do is to actually, if they're in training, is when they do a keto meal, make sure that it's what I've coined it carnivore keto, because I want them to think about upping their protein. So instead of that moderate protein approach to ketogenic, if they are having a keto meal, make sure that protein's not 0.7 or 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, but more like 1+ gram per pound of body weight. So that protein portion goes up on your plate a little bit when you're in training, because you need that extra protein for recovery. And you will, if you undershoot your carbs, when you're in big training, that extra protein will convert through gluconeogenesis to help top off glycogen and get you ready for the next workout. So I think there is like kind of some nuance in there if you're in the middle of big training, because sometimes our camp, I would say this is a caution for our camp. Sometimes people that come to our camps get chronically too low carb. And chronically, I would say most of the time we should be like moderate low carb and not super low carb. And I think too many people get stuck in this like, oh my gosh, worried about eating carbs all the time. And they're like almost carb phobic. Whereas the carbs have a very, especially if you're getting them from like these natural sources, like we're talking about veggies and fruit, right? And starch like potatoes and sweet potatoes. And a little bit of like strategic white, like rice, but like if we're doing that, like then we're getting that's signaling to the body, right? This comes back to our hunter-gatherer ancestral days. This is signaling the body like regulate hormones, regulate your thyroid, right? Because that's what we see in the chronic low carb camp, right? The chronic, what I call chronic keto. The problem with chronic keto is at some point you're signaling your body you're in a time of lean and you're never going to come out of it. And the body starts to downregulate metabolism, downregulate your fat metabolism, and downregulate your thyroid and your hormones. So and then they get out of whack, and then you actually gain weight on it because your body's in a stressful situation. So we want to also caution listeners, if you've been chronic keto for a long time, or consider yourself a quote keto athlete, which I hate that term personally, because the OFM is the beauty of OFM is strategic carbohydrate use around effort and volume. I can't stress that enough. This is the one thing in the coaching side of things that I have to emphasize a lot, because athletes will get carb phobic after they've gone keto, and we want to bring those strategic carbs back and leverage them to signal to the body that we aren't in a time of lean.
Yeah, no, I've looked at this, and that's why I call it OFM, and it's fat metabolism, not optimal fat burning, because you cannot optimize your metabolic processes unless you bring those carbs in, because the carbs allow you to have that signaling and that performance push you need so your body gets stronger, fitter, faster.
Yeah, exactly.
And the low carb camp, they don't want to have that conversation about the downregulation of the PDH, pyruvate dehydrogenase pathway, and how once you've downregulated that pyruvate dehydrogenase pathways, even if you bring the carbs in, until you upregulate it over a couple of weeks, you can't even access those carbs, and you basically screwed the governor down to a very low setting. You can't get out of second or third gear. And yeah, you can go all day, but if you try to go to say fourth or fifth gear, you start to have the adrenal stress and all that. And I agree with you. You get people who are carb phobic because they were doing high carb and felt miserable and had the energy swings, and they go low carb, and then they feel so much better. They're just afraid of carbs, and plus the messaging out of the keto camp is sugar's the devil, and 1 teaspoon of sugar is gonna break you. And it's like, if 1 teaspoon of sugar is going to break somebody, or the amount of carbs that are in a pouch of Vespa, they got other problems to think about then.
And I feel like this is where the two camps, the high carb camp and the super low carb keto camp, this is where OFM sits in the middle and of those two camps. And that's where I feel like, I don't know if you've seen this like whole thing that's going back and forth with Tim Noakes and Louise Burke, right? But they've been like debating back and forth over like, the low carb performance side of things, that it doesn't affect performance. And she's saying, hey, from a performance perspective, you need all these carbs, right? So there's these two like opposite ends of the spectrum, like approaches and arguments about performance and fuel substrates. And one of the things I feel like both of them are missing is that actually OFM's kind of like sits in between the two camps. Like it sits like probably a little closer to the keto camp, but still it sits in this camp where we're using those carbs strategically. Like even the race walker study that Burke did, that is probably one thing that gets under my skin more than anything, is that specific study, is because they did this keto adaptation during the volume block, and then they brought back carbs for 3 weeks before the actual performance. And they only gave them 3 weeks, I think, of adaptation. So they were just starting to get adapted and probably felt like crap in that volume block, right? So yep. Okay, during COVID, I have to give a little like side note, and this will never come out except in a podcast like this because it was behind closed doors. But Louise Burke's associate in the UK, who's an understudy of hers working on her PhD, did a Zoom call during COVID with me because Louise was still it was after the race walker study, and she was still studying and thinking about this fat thing. Right? She's interested in it
She's been trying to crack the code for decades.
Yeah. So I gave them the code, but they don't listen, of course. So I basically had an hour Zoom call with this woman, and I said, all due respect to Dr. Burke, but she doesn't get it. That race walker study was designed poorly.
It was designed to fail.
It was designed to fail. Exactly. And so I outlined, like, you need to keto adapt first in a low volume phase, then bring back strategic carbs, but not go crazy on them during the volume block. And so they signal and recover, and then go back into a little bit of a short keto phase in the taper, and then bring back strategic carbs right before the event. And then use carbs during the event, and they will perform awesome. And of course, I never heard from them again. I feel like it's almost like she's coming into these with a bias, that she wants to disprove fat because she's in this like high carb camp and this high carb bias. And it's really frustrating from my perspective after racing a decade on this and performing at a pretty high level for my age, especially. Yes. And kind of almost having like a resurgence of my career in my mid 40s on, because
you told me that you were thinking about giving up competitive ultrarunning in 2015. It gotten so bad.
It gotten so bad on the high carb approach that I just couldn't. I felt like crap. And this is where, like, I was just having an email conversation with a 50-something-year-old guy yesterday who I used to coach, and we're longtime friends. He and I have known each other for 25 years, and I got an opportunity to coach him later in his career when he was in his 40s, and he was like, he used to do high carb like me, and he was just struggling, and he switched to OFM, felt amazing. He's still doing it on his own. I taught him how to do it, and I coached him for a couple seasons, and then he kind of went off on his own, and we're good friends. We text probably almost weekly. And he was just saying, like, we were talking about this high carb kind of like protocol, like how everyone's pushing high carb. And he's like, he goes, you know what? Like, he goes, they're going to, wait till they're 45. That's basically what he was saying. Wait till you're 45 and you're going to feel it. You're going to feel like crap. You're going to put on weight. You're going to be skinny fat. because you're going to have all this like water weight and carb weight that you can't get rid of anymore like you used to when you were younger. And then you're going to feel like you're just going to feel crappy. And you might even be pre-diabetic with circulating blood glucose over 120, right? So, and not even know it in the background unless you were like tracking your blood sugar. Like that's the problem with the high carb camp, is that they're pushing so many carbs. There's no balance, right? It's typical in life. It's like there's always
just look at our national politics.
Right. There's extremes, right? So like, that's why I think like OFM sits in the middle. And I think that's might be where there is some disconnect within the community, the endurance community, of understanding what we're actually doing, because they don't really take the time to learn what we're doing. They're just like, they judge it and they throw us in the keto camp and then judge it. Whereas, you know, we actually sit in the middle where we're balancing between the two fuel substrates. And that's the ideal way for long endurance events. Now,
well, it's all about metabolism. And let me give you some backstory so you understand a lot of this, where it came with Louise Burke and the graduate student you were working with, you talked to. So when I first started doing this, I worked with John Olson and Jenny Capel and Roxanne Woodhouse, and then Bree Lambert Sanders came on, and they were all like struggling with GI issues. And in 2010, I think somebody showed me an article about Steve Finney talking about it, and says, hey, this guy kind of thinks like you do. And then so I contacted Steve. It turns out he lived in Elk Grove, which is south of Sacramento, and we started meeting. And what happened was he and Jeff Bollock, you know, they're like the two top researchers of ketogenic.
Yeah, I read both their books.
Right. And I was an editor. I was actually an editor and proofreader for both of their books, and they profiled us in their performance book. And they talked that like we use Vespa and we use more carbs, which they weren't on board with that. But it's interesting because in working with them in 2012, we did the Western States study, which never got published because they just didn't have enough subjects and data to publish it in a high impact, high tier journal. They could have got it published in like PLOS One, because a lot of stuff, I don't know if you're familiar with academic journal ranking, but they wanted to get it in a real high ranked journal. And because they didn't feel that it would make it, they didn't publish that. But that was the year, it was 2012. It was a cool year, very cool year, but that was the year Timmy Olson won. And I remember when you were talking about what your Western States, that happened to him. He didn't have but a couple of gels between Robinson Flat and Michigan Bluff, and he was fine. You know, he had his Vespa, and you know, he won the course, won the race, set the course record. But in 2012, they did the Western States study, so it was two different cohorts: high carb athletes and then the Vespa OFM athletes. And Zach was in that. John Olson, I can't remember. There was a whole bunch of people, names you'd probably be familiar with. Anyway, what came out of that was these ultra endurance events do massive, on both sets, massive amount of oxidative stress.
Totally.
But the Vespa OFM athletes recovered like boom. And we'll talk about the recovery later, because that's one of the big hallmarks of it. But they like boom. And that study that didn't get published led to the faster study. And I was involved with that too. I was involved with both things in the background, with design and recruiting and blah, blah, blah. So what happened with faster study was, of course, they recruited, and 10 of the 12 low carb diet cohort were Vespa OFM athletes. I personally got them all started. People like Zach, Ben Greenfield, Dan Lentz, John Rutherford, all those guys. I got 10 of the 12. And you can see it in the data points. There's 10 people who are way up, and then there's 2 people in the low carb that are significantly lower. And that's the keto guys.
Right.
Right. And what happened was, and this is a big reason the problem with researchers is they're so into their research. They're humans, right? They think they're scientists, but they're still human. They have these conformational biases.
Yeah.
And Steve and Jeff were just so, low carb diet, ketones, that they paraded out faster as low carb keto can match performance in elites, right? That's what the faster study. Now, yes, they were straight keto when they were doing the data collection, but those 10 of those 12 were in real life. They were training and racing using the Vespa and the strategic
carbs.
Right. And they didn't do that. So when that study came out and Burke published an editorial 1 week after the publication, a big one, saying maybe we need to reconsider this fat thing. And so I'm like, how did she do that fast? Because it was a big, of course, she's got her ego in it too. There's a lot of big egos, right?
Yeah, especially when you've been a scientist that long.
Right.
And maybe that's why she never called me back, because they recorded that Zoom call and I said, to all due respect, that study was not designed very well. And
right.
sure that probably rubbed her the wrong way.
Right. So I asked Steve how she was able to do that quickly. And she said she was probably one of the anonymous peer reviewers for the faster study.
Got it.
Because she's been trying to crack the code. So what happened, the backstory here is what happened is it got paraded out in 2015, 16, or 2013 as keto. You can do keto and win. And everybody tried it and they didn't use Vespa, they didn't use carbs, and it was a huge fail. So many ultra runners.
Exactly. It's almost like they
shot themselves in the foot.
Exactly. That was always the biggest thing with that, because faster studies always been able to kind of like in the past, the only thing we've been able to leverage a little bit as a quote study. And but it's still not designed well from like a performance perspective. It's awesome in showing that, like, hey, we can really get our fat oxidation rate up really high. But as you know, even in that study, I wish this would have been a few, 5-6 years later, because as you've seen, when we reflect back on my 10 years of doing OFM, so this is moderate low carb. When I say moderate low carb, I mean 75 to 150 grams a day, probably occasionally 200. If you don't count my carb intake during a long run day, like if you counted my carb intake on a long run day, it'd probably be 300 or 400 grams of carbs, maybe.
Oh, on a race day, Jeff, 90% of your calories are probably be carb calories, but it's only like 20% of the calories you burn.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I think that's important to kind of now I'm losing where my point. I had a point here and I forgot what it was.
About faster.
Oh yeah. So one of the things that I feel like, okay, I lost it.
It's okay, but that's
the thing. Let's just keep going.
Yeah. When it comes back, so let me keep this backstory because it's relevant for you to know and understand, but also for the audience. So they paraded it out as keto. You can perform on keto, and everybody tried it. I know a lot of people tried it, and it just was an epic fail, and they were all slamming it. It got slammed really bad in 2013, 14 when people were trying it. So the fat adaptation, metabolic health movement shot itself in the foot big time, and has set it back, I think, years as a result.
I think so too.
Yeah. So now, another part of this, another data point in connecting these dots of the backstory is the original carb loading studies out of Sweden. So get this now, and this is where you are right and Louise Burke is wrong, but what do you know? Because you're just an ultra runner, you're not an academic. So get this, I remember years ago, I was working with
academics just like studying and reading. So
and I'll give you in the audience some things about studies, because I look at papers, tons of papers, not just athletic, but anyway, I was talking with Nikki Kimball when I first started working with her, because she was also, she learned from Jenny and Roxanne. And anyway, she goes, OFM sounds a lot like the original carb loading study. So I went back and pulled them up and read the design. And so they were done back in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, right?
Yeah. Okay. This is the Sweden thing, right? Okay.
The Sweden, where carb loading actually started.
Okay.
The whole carb loading for marathon, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So these were done prior to Ansel Keys and the dietary health hypothesis, the cholesterol,
Right.
red meat, eggs. Okay. So prior to that, it was well known that you fed athletes steak and eggs. You gave them protein. Yes, you gave them carbs.
Yes.
But they were eating a lot of protein and fat. They would eat liver. Those were staples for people who were doing athletics.
Yep.
Okay. Now.
And raw dairy probably in Sweden.
Yeah. Okay. And dairy. They were eating a whole foods diet with lots of protein. So it was before that whole Ansel Keys thing that shifted everything towards high carb, low fat, and watch your red meat, watch your cholesterol.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So they were what they did was they took young, competitive athletic males, and they put them through a 2-week carb restriction. Now it wasn't huge, but then when you've got young competitive males, testosterone will cover up a whole host of sins. But they did.
Can I make a comment here? I
Yeah.
think the other thing that's interesting to note when you take in healthy young males who are training hard and training volume, even if they are having carbs, but they're eating high protein, their body is going to be in a carb restricted state part of their training throughout the week all the time. Someone like Tom Evans, who is a higher carb athlete, he's a really good fat burner because he runs doubles and he runs 120 or 130 miles a week. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. They have the metabolic capacity, plus the testosterone will cover up a bunch of sins. It'll keep your insulin down. It'll do a whole bunch of things. So, but they put them through a 2-week carb restriction. Now, it wasn't a full metabolic. It wasn't like low carb, like super low carb, but they did restrict the carbs up until those 3 days where they carb loaded them. So when you think about that, it's like, wait a second. The context and the actual execution, the design was very similar. What you were saying to Louise and her graduate student on that Zoom call versus what Louise had done.
Yeah.
And so, the reason why there's a need, most athletes are in middle age, their hormones aren't going as strong as they did, their metabolism turned down, but also we've been decades on this high carb, low fat mantra. And so people who are eating a lot of carbs for a long time and then trying to race on it, they have to do that hard, what we call a harder metabolic reset, a hard one where they really cut the carbs out and then start bringing them back. And then the other thing is you want to, with us, we use keto as a tool, right? So you do a reset, get started, but then in your recovery phase, you kind of do 2 or 3 days where you're getting your carbs down below 50.
Yeah.
You don't need it. And that, and once again, that if you're reasonably metabolically fit, that'll reset your hormones. You'll get your insulin down, your leptin down. It'll get everything back in shape to where you can come back. You can start bringing the carbs back in for the volume.
Yeah, exactly. And I always look at it as kind of a tool. I did remember what my point was on this, that I lost for a second. It came back to me. One of the things I wish I would have been part of that FASTER study at some point, because what I've seen over 10 years, and I think this is important to kind of note in context, in that 10-year walk, I've ebbed and flowed my carbs, my strategic carbs, higher and lower at times, just just in season.
Yeah. This is a collaborative experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm the guinea pig. So One of the things I found was, in the first, say, 4 or 5 years, when we did a lot of studies, we did studies at GU in their metabolic lab on my fat oxidation rate. We did some stuff at Utah State, you and me, a couple days. My max fat oxidation rate during that time was like 1.3 grams a minute. Now, GU, we saw 2.1 grams a minute. But then later we did some stuff in Scottsdale a few years ago, and I was like, my max was 2.2 grams a minute. So
it was higher. It was higher than that, but you and Peter were able to sustain over 2 grams a minute for 20 minutes.
that's what I'm saying. So like, as I've done this and kept consistent in my lifestyle OFM diet, strategic carbohydrates, 80 to 90% of the week, meaning 1 to 4 meals a week, I don't stress about at all. I'll go eat Mexican food and eat chips and salsa and guacamole and rice and beans and everything else, right, at the plate. But I only do it a few meals a week, and a majority, 80 to 90% of my meals are OFM. And so what I'm finding is over that decade trajectory of being consistent, that my fat oxidation rate has slowly climbed consistently, which is a really cool kind of like data point that no one's talking about. So when they are out there talking on all these podcasts right now about, there's a lot of talk because there's been some more recent studies that going into in the low carb camp to talking about like, well, most of our glucose is coming from our liver glycogen, and actually we're not accessing our muscle glycogen during events, and that like really we just need like 3 grams, every 20 minutes of carbohydrate.
The low carb camps slowly starting to admit that maybe some carbs will help.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're saying 3 grams, like every 20 minutes or something, which is not very much, like 9 grams or 6 or 9 grams.
10 grams an hour.
Hour. But like, that's so, but that's not going to help performance. In my experience, you need a little more carbs than that if you're going to output hard. But like, one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that the longer you do this, the better your fat metabolism gets over time. So like, it took 5 or 6 years before I really started to see like a pretty consistent 2+ grams a minute, right? The first time I saw it at GU, that was only like 2 years in. The reason I saw that is because we did 3 days of testing, and I probably by day 3, I was in a carb depleted state from the testing, right? So I saw a 2+ gram a minute, but later we saw it as a baseline, like the first day, right? My fasted first day baseline was like 1.3 grams a minute when we did Utah State, when we did GU, but when we did it at Scottsdale, which that's fast forward like 8 years in or 7 years in, all of a sudden I'm doing 2.2 grams a minute, and I'm sustaining that for a long period of time, right? 20 minutes and up to over 90% of my VO2 max. So like this kind of, that data really isn't out there. Like when you start to see like,
there's nobody out there that has data that you and Peter have pulled. Nobody.
I know. This is why I wish we would have been in the faster study. Cause me, I'm pretty like, I like to talk about this.
It's funny.
Had I been in there with Finney and Volek, I would have been saying, well, no, you guys are getting it wrong. You're like talking about this keto thing. It's strategic carbs.
I know, I get it, because my friend Dan Lynch, he's a former operator with an operation that's named like an airline.
Yep.
Anyway, he subbed for Mike Morton. Okay. And because Mike introduced me to Dan, because Dan was doing ultras and struggling, and I got him going. And he was doing exactly what you were saying right now. He was telling him, you guys got to talk to Peter. You got to get on this OFM and you got to do this. It's not straight keto. And they just, they blew him off, because it's just like, it's confirmational bias.
Well, and exactly, that's what, think about it. You got 2 books. They're coming from the broken metabolic side of bias too, right? So they're coming in, and because keto, frankly, for the sedentary person with a broken metabolism, keto is going to help them really well. They might have to do a carb refeed every once in a while to help like signal to their hormones, but generally they got to stay really low carb to help themselves like live day to day.
Well, and that's the thing, they're so broken, and because that broken, I have a term that I call metabolic capacity. They have such low metabolic capacity, their mitochondria, they don't have much mitochondria, so their ability to burn fat is real low, and so that tolerance is really low. When you build metabolic capacity like you or Peter or me, I'm like you. I don't care if I have carbs. I mean, if I open a bag of chips and smash them, I feel like crap and I don't do it for another month, but I can do it. And I'm not saying that's good, but it's like you say, 80 or 90% of the time, I'm good. And the biggest lever for me is if I'm not so good, I know I got to go out and do something big, physically, right? To clean it out and build that capacity back. But the more metabolic capacity you build, the more you oxidize fat, but also that window of tolerance opens up hugely.
Yeah. Especially when you are thinking about timing. I think the timing piece of OFM is a really key piece to where you're like, hey, I'm strategically timing my carbohydrate intake after a workout in the 6 to 8 hour window after that workout, where it really is like my body's in a good glucose uptake state. It wants to bring in a bunch of glucose. And then after that, you're going to top off glycogen. You're going to like recover really well. You're going to signal to your hormones. You're going to signal to your thyroid. And I think that's the beauty of OFM. I know we're talking about OFM a lot today. And I think we do want to talk a little bit about Vespa, because one of the things we saw in the studies that we've done in the labs, and we don't have any published data on this really, but we do have like some lab time using Vespa. We've seen a small bump in fat oxidation rate. And so using Vespa as a supplement, I think this is my time to plug Vespa for a second. I think using Vespa strategically during races think of it as a supplement every couple hours. Every 2 or 3 hours, you're dripping in that Vespa. So it's keeping your fat oxidation rate bumped up just a little bit. And then you're dripping those carbs and you don't have to go high carb. So the beauty of no high carb is you don't have any GI stress during the race, especially if you don't do a bunch of solids during the race either. This is where I'm a big proponent of liquid nutrition. If you're pushing, if you're racing, or you're in hot races, you're going to have you lose 80% of your blood flow to the gut. So your gut can't handle much. It's in they call it ischemia. It's basically lack of oxygen to the gut, right? You're getting starved of oxygen in your gut. So one of the things that I've been starting to kind of like go down, which I've done for a long time, because I had some gut issues when one of the reasons I came to OFM in the first place was to help with some gut stuff. But one of the things I've been looking into as I've looked into this exercise-induced leaky gut issue, which I think I've experienced a few times, one of the things that you can do to start healing that, right, is to help with your gut and your gut junctions, meaning your gut junctions stay tight and they don't leak into the bloodstream when you're racing, when you have lack of oxygen, is to actually think about some supplementation for your gut. So that's like, butyrate for colon and large intestines, and that's L-glutamine, which is an amino acid for your small intestines, right? Most of your absorbing during a race is happening in the small intestines. So you really want to think about glutamine supplementation and that kind of thing during your lifestyle. So that way, when you show up at that race, your body has had all these resources to build good gut lining and strengthen its lining, and the mucus layer in the colon is thicker. I would say one caveat: if you're going to supplement butyrate, look for good sources. I was not able to find any. If you're an elite athlete that's looking at this or listening to this, be careful, because there is no NSF certified butyrate out there. I did find Thorne has like a leaky gut support in a powder that I've been taking that's NSF certified, that gives you all the precursors that your colon needs to build and produce butyrate, which will help like the stomach lining of the colon and make it thicker so you don't leak during a race. So those are some other strategies in, not only how to use Vespa, but also how to like help with gut. I think what we do in these long races, 100s, 200s, especially these long races, and especially if it's hot, we talked about oxidative stress earlier. We are putting our bodies through a major stress situation. And a lot of that stress is in the gut behind the scenes that we don't understand. And that's why we see, the number one thing that people complain about during an ultra if you ask them, is GI stress. Our guts are really stressed out during these races. So anything you can do in lifestyle to help like support that gut health, and then also backing off, that's the beauty of OFM, and using Vespa as a strategic supplement to help that gut not have to do all that work, not have to do as much work.
Yeah. So, that's why that was my big epiphany when I started working with John and Jenny, and I dove into the textbooks about this, was high carb athletes are literally burning themselves up from the inside out.
Yeah.
And this is why this conversation is really relevant, because I've talked about this. I'm not so much for the supplementation, because butyrate is actually produced in your colon by your biome, if it's really healthy. And so you
just need the right ingredients to help that butyrate production.
And so I like to, one of the things about OFM, and you're on board with this, is try to get as much from real food.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so the protocol I have for stomach and gut health is there's two things. You got to get your actual stomach and gut, your GI tract, in really good shape. And that's with using. So what I've done is I've gotten people to eat high collagen foods, particularly tripe. So menudo con pata without the hominy. That's been I've got people who don't even like it that eat it because it does so much for their gut. But if you have high collagen, especially that type of collagen that tripe is, it will restore your gut and make that epithelium and mucous membrane really robust, and then colonizing it with strains that actually colonize, not just probiotic foods, but most of the probiotics on the market don't colonize well because it's good for business.
Right.
So I think a lot of like what you're seeing with OFM, like you were alluding to, how over the last 10 years, it's gotten just better and better. It's because your stomach and gut have recovered from where we started,
my gut was destroyed.
Yeah. And so,
I'm sure that's from being like completely high carb for 15 years.
Okay. So let me run this down for you in the audience in case, and I've done this, I say it all the time, but like that was my epiphany with John, was when I looked in the textbooks and was talking with Steve Finney about this. Your epithelium is like a brand new shag carpet, right? And the mucous membrane. But the analogy I use is, think of it like a rainforest canopy. And the mucous membrane is like the fog and the mist, and your biome resides in that. Well, when you're racing, especially in the heat, your GI tract, as far as blood flow, is on sleep. So the amount of oxygen getting to those epithelial cells is practically nothing. It's just maintenance, right?
Yep. And
then you throw a bunch of simple carbs in there. You're pouring gasoline down there, and you're throwing a match down the hole. And it's burning the rainforest down, just like we see, burns it down to a stubble. Then what kind of biome, what kind of flora and fauna can you support in a grass stubble, just like in the rainforest? And that's and the thing is, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes years, as you know, right? But when it gets to that critical point, then it's bad. And there's a whole bunch of variables, like, how people eat, how many antibiotics they've used, where they were born vaginally or cesarean, how much processed food do they eat with the preservatives. There's all kinds of different factors that are going to factor into, just how robust somebody's stomach and gut is. But, getting those high collagen foods and then probiotics.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was your number two? Number one was high collagen foods like tripe. What was your number two?
Well, number one is get your GI tract, which is your epithelium and your GI tract. And then number two is colonizing it with strains of probiotics that actually colonize. Most probiotics on the market, they do really great jobs at marketing and telling you this stuff, but they don't colonize because they want you to take it all the time. Like the
so are you talking like fermented foods?
Fermented foods are part of that, yes. Like kimchi. I have kimchi a lot. For yogurt.
And I do a lot of live sauerkraut and live pickles personally in my diet for that. So that's my strategy for gut. And I do also do cultured yogurt in my mix. So like my weekly strategy is to You think of those foods as like a supplement. So you're peppering them in as a little side or on top of a salad
and the things like kimchi and sauerkraut that are fermented, and cultured yogurt, cultured cheese and stuff like that. Most of that gets damaged or killed off in the stomach before it makes it to the GI tract. But if you're having like your sauerkraut, a big load of sauerkraut with some veggies and stuff, a lot of that will survive and get to the colon and the small intestine. I mean, the thing is we have our biome is that lining starts in our mouth and our nose, our nasal passages, and goes all the way to the rectum. And it's just that most of it's in the colon, but there's plenty in your nose and your mouth, and like that's a big thing with periodontal disease, is having the right balance of your biome in your mouth to keep from tooth decay. And then, just like with you with your candida, if your mouth has too much sugar, it promotes sugar burning bacteria and then tooth decay and periodontal disease.
Yeah.
So it's all connected, but that's what I was saying, is like, that was my epiphany, was literally athletes are killing themselves from the inside out, and nobody wants to have a conversation on that. That's the thing. You got the ketards. I know I'm going off there. Ketards don't want to admit that there's a performance limiting thing with keto. And then the high carb people, they don't want to talk about the fact that it's simply too much sugar.
Yeah. So this is like anything, Peter, right? It's always like the pendulum swings one way, it swings the other way. And it always, like, the real truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Like we've been talking about this whole podcast, it's OFM's in the middle. It's not, it might be on some people who are really high performing athletes and really fast and doing high volume doubles, like big training. They might be able to go more in the higher carb camp, meaning carbs per hour during the race or long run, the carbs on a daily basis. They might be able to get up in that, what we call moderate low carb. They might be able to get up in 200 grams a day in their daily diet at times. But then there's other where they should ebb and flow according to effort and volume and that kind of thing. But then there's this other part of the camp, like middle to back of the packers. They might need to be more on the, like on the spectrum of the keto side of things, meaning not keto, but maybe strategically keto at times, right? With a little higher protein. And then they're going to have less carbs per hour during their long runs and races, right? And they're going to eat less than that. And they're going to rely on their fat metabolism and those kind of things. But I think that's what the key here is that it's always in the middle somewhere, right?
Well, it's in the middle, and there has to be a conversation. Like, we're throwing balls in the air and trading our experiences and learning from each other and trying to, and if you look at modern online marketing, it's all about getting people to react.
Yeah. And
it's like people need to learn to understand, and like that middle is like my philosophy, and I know it's yours, is people are individuals, and what's going to be best for you isn't what Tom Evans is doing.
Right.
It's not what Courtney Dauwalter is doing.
And I'm a way different athlete than Tom. Like, I've been in this 26 years. I'm 54. Like, I've been like I can't handle the carbs like I used to. My metabolic system is like, nope, you aren't doing that, dude. Like, unless you want issues. So like, and my dad, I lost my father to type 2 diabetes. So like, I'm like, I have a very like personal thing in this, that I saw like what too many carbs does to a person long-term. And I don't want to be in that camp, right? I don't want to, like, I know that I was on that path as an athlete, because you're putting yourself through so much stress. I had a side question for you that I was going to ask you if you'd seen this. Did you see this most recent study that came out on colon health from the Washington Post? Did an article on it.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Okay. And I commented because it came up on a Facebook post, and Andy Pasternak, who's the doctor at Western States, we got to look into it. And I posited, okay, it's very well known and established nobody argues that running and walking is very healthy for peristaltic movement of the bowel, which is key to colon health. So running and walking is good for your colon. And so I posit, well, maybe it's because most ultra runners or ultra endurance athletes are putting way too much sugar through their body.
Okay, so here's was my take too. 1, small cohort. 2, young cohort, meaning 20 something. So that means that like I look back to my 20s and I was eating a lot of processed food. And especially if you're a runner, every runner I know in their 20s right now is pounding bread, pasta, cereal, crap, Pop-Tarts, candy bars, like junk. Like I watch someone who's in their 20s versus their 30s even. Someone in their 30s is already making little shifts, like more protein versus carbs, right? There's these shifts as you age, as you realize and learn more and more and more about the metabolism and recovery. They're like, oh, I need more protein in my diet, you know? So like if you look at a 20-something elite versus a 30-something elite, usually by the mid-30s, they're starting to think about like their diet a little bit, even if it's still high carb. But my point here is that they're looking at a cohort. I want you to think about the umbrella context of the cohort. That was my point in this, was that it's probably a bunch of processed food and a lot of sugar and a lot of crappy sugar besides the gels during running, but in lifestyle diet too.
Absolutely, because that's what they're pushing. And all you have to do, all people, and one of my comments with that is just go do a Google search of colon cancer and high carbohydrate diet. And it just explodes the amount of studies linking colorectal cancer to high carb diet, sedentary lifestyle, even if you're running, but high carb diet.
But even in the running context, remember how we're talking about no blood flow, right? Like your GI tract is getting very, like you said, you said it, maintenance blood flow is all it's getting during
an sleep mode.
So you throw a lifestyle sugar diet on top of it that's
right,
high
and guess what happens? And this is where the GI issues, part of it's that you erode your GI tract, your epithelium, and it gets very, very sensitive. And I'm going to detour here first. When you have a real healthy epithelium and mucous membrane and biome, that is your first line immune response before your immune system actually needs to kick in.
Right.
Your biome in a really rich flora and fauna in that really big, thick epithelium will mitigate, break down proteins and make them into the right proteins and right fatty acids before your immune system needs to even kick in. As you erode that, and that's why you see people have these immune system issues flare up, or they get autoimmune like lupus. You see a lot of ultra runners develop autoimmune conditions, and it's that was the detour I want to take there. But when you look at GI issues, that's one issue. But the other thing is, as you know, when it gets hot, your system can handle even less, right? Because it's flowing more blood to the skin surface to cool and less to the GI tract. Well, that's where people really, if they try to push their carbs, they're puking. Well, it's because, like you say, there's no oxygen going there. There's nothing going on. Those carbs are sitting, and the next thing you know, they're fermenting.
Yeah,
and that's where things get real ugly, because your stomach's becoming a beer brewing vat, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting you mentioned about the young people doing the sport, because I've been thinking about writing an article and trying to get a bunch of people like you and Mark Allen and some veterans that have been around. Dave Scott's very vocal about this. And the title is actually this: what if we're sacrificing our young at this altar of performance, and its carbs? And
here's the thing. This is the thing that really, like, there's a void in the research that we started this conversation talking about, right? There's a void in the research of performance. If we're talking through a lens of performance, there's still, and what that performance can be a wide variety of context, but there's this void between this low carb camp that we're talking about, the keto camp, and the high carb camp. Whereas even Paul Booth's recent study that's about to be published is an interesting one, where that's why I found it really interesting. He talks about 90 grams versus 120, no difference in performance. Well, what if we get to an athlete and let's try 60 versus 90, right? Like, is there a difference? I'd like us to keep going down, like 60 versus 90 in athletes. And then I'd like to see two cohorts in that camp, like 60, like say 40 and 60, or 50 and 70, or something like that, where we're comparing. And then that's when we would bring in like a low carb group and a high carb group. An OFM group is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see an OFM group, a true OFM group who've had plenty of time to adapt and are used to the lifestyle. You know, some of our OFM athletes, I'd like to see them versus the high carb camp in a performance study personally.
I agree. And if we were doing better, I would fund that in a heartbeat, because it's kind of hard to parse out, because it's like I said, when you're doing Vespa, and Vespa is part of that whole OFM pyramid I created, right? You got stomach and gut. You got first the metabolic, fat adapted metabolic state, where your basic thing is burning fat. Then you got nutrition, not calories, right? And then you go the stomach and gut, training and lifestyle. Hydration is a big one, right? You know that. And then we got Vespa. But it's like, I remember when we were taking that data, it's like people know it works, but they can't put their finger on it, because it's not like you take a Red Bull and you instantly get a kick, or you take a gel when your blood sugar's low and you get a kick, or you take a big dose of caffeine and you get a kick.
Well, and I think probably, to be honest with the OFM versus Vespa piece of this, I think sometimes, this is my honest opinion, and we've talked about this behind closed doors, but sometimes OFM overshadows Vespa, meaning that you think you have to do OFM to do Vespa, whereas we've seen Vespa actually help high carb athletes burn more fat per minute. So by supplementing Vespa during events. So even if you're a listener out there and you're one of our few high carb athletes listening to this right now, like, try Vespa and then just back off on your carb calories just a little bit per hour. And maybe 20%, 30%.
I tell people start at half and then titrate up or down depending on what you're doing, right? If you're doing a recovery run and you use a Vespa, you don't need it's just Vespa salt and water.
Yeah, right.
And then if you're racing, you might be 20 or 30% lower than what you normally use.
Yeah, but the beauty is you're not getting that issue with not being able to, that lack of blood flow to the gut. You don't have to take as many carbs per hour, during the race. Right. Vespa allows you to do that as a high carb athlete. So I wanted to plug that, because I feel like that sometimes gets lost, because you and I love to talk about OFM, and we love to talk about metabolic health and longevity and all those things, and long-term health, right? And gut biome and everything else. We like to get in the weeds. But I also want to make sure that listeners understand that Vespa has a place outside of OFM. Yeah,
it's just to get started and get the experience just by using Vespa. You don't have to change your diet. You don't have to go down all these rabbit holes. Just cut your carbs. And that's another.
Can I add one more thing before we get off this subject, and I don't want to lose it? I think another thing for athletes out there, if you're listening and you're a high carb athlete, really think about, one of the simple shifts I do with athletes I start coaching that come to me and just want to talk about diet a little bit, or I like to bring up what's your lifestyle diet look like, because that's one of the questionnaires when you onboard with us in my coaching business. And I want to know what their regular diet looks like. But if they're a really high carb athlete, one of the things we do shifts with right away that are super, super low hanging fruit, easy. One is eat real food for carbs. So start
cut the Pop-Tarts.
Replace your pasta and bread with rice and potatoes. That's one. Number two is we say up your protein. Make sure you're hitting 1+ gram per pound of body weight every day when you're training. I would prefer, especially if you're a faster athlete or doing higher volume, you probably want to be 1.1 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight in protein, and make sure you're getting good animal proteins coming in every day, prioritized in every meal, 3 meals a day. Make sure you're getting those, hitting those numbers. And I think that's the simple shift. Just shifting some of your carb calories to protein calories in your macros during the day, and then and less processed carbohydrates. Just those little shifts will really reap huge benefits to that athlete initially. So that one's a huge one, because we're getting real food and then we're prioritizing protein. So I always say, if you're going to go back for seconds, go back for protein. Don't go back for carbs.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
that's it. That's what I wanted to get in there.
Yeah. And the thing about Vespa, one of the things we've learned, so the reason we like to get in the weeds is, and it's not that we don't believe Vespa works. We know it works, and we know it's critical to the whole OFM thing, but it's just one thing. See, we're not trying to make it the thing like modern marketing does. It's like, you got to do a keto diet, or you got to do 120 grams an hour, or you have to track your blood sugar. I mean, everybody's has become accustomed to getting marketed one thing. So we're having this conversation where we go all over the map, and Vespa is part of that map, but it's just one part. It's a tool, right?
Yeah,
Diet's a tool. Yeah.
Just like diet's a tool, just like your carbs during a race are a tool, just like your electrolytes are a tool.
Yeah, it's a tool.
Like another piece of the puzzle.
It's all about you and your metabolism, and so it is a valuable tool. But one thing that I've seen consistently that people need to know is, if you're going to try the Vespa and you're a high carb diet, high carb fueler, back off at least 20 to 30%, ideally 50% to start with, and then go up or down, because if you try to fuel the same way, it'll probably backfire.
Yeah.
That's been pretty consistent. So you've been doing this for now over 10 years.
Over 10 years. I am over 10 years, man. I started in December of 2015.
That's right. And so what are your thoughts on that in terms of longevity in sport, performance? This is the point. But let me and the point I want to make about this, for you to make about this, is we've talked about this. This is too much sugar. And I've done a little bit of content where I actually calculated out how much sugar a ultra endurance athlete does in the 6 months up to and through an Ironman or 100-mile ultra. And
that's a lot of sugar.
And this is on the standard sports diet, not the what the pros do, but just the standard 60% carbohydrate, and 100 to 200 calories an hour fueling, additional calories, whether it's from diet or fueling, for every hour of working out. Do you know how much sugar it comes to?
What is that?
155 pounds of sugar is glucose.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How many teaspoons of sugar is that? Because our homeostasis in our bloodstream is 1 teaspoon.
1 teaspoon of sugar is glucose. It's 155 pounds of sugar as glucose.
I want to know 155 pounds of glucose. I want to convert that to teaspoons. That's even going to be a crazier number. Like how much teaspoons of glucose you're throwing at your bloodstream.
Yeah, normal healthy blood sugar is 1 teaspoon of sugar. That's what your body likes.
Your pancreas, it's like punching your pancreas over and over in like a fight. Like, oh my God.
And because we're so robust, we can handle it, but over time, if you do that chronically, it's bad. And so here's the pitch for OFM. When people have no idea how much sugar they're consuming. Yeah. Right. And when they hear that, it gets them. But it's like, you and I aren't saying no sugar, no carbs. We're saying, what if you take a third out? That's 50 pounds of sugar you just eliminated. If you take 75 or 50%, that's 75 pounds of sugar. If you're like, say, Peter, who's lower carb than you are, in his run, he's taken out 2/3. So he's he's taken out 100 pounds of sugar compared to the average, not the elite, but the average person. But he's still got 50, 60 pounds of strategic carbs to use in 6 months. That's 10 pounds of sugar a month to use strategically. You think maybe, and so people intuitively know too much sugar is not a good thing, but they just have no idea that carbs or sugar turn into sugar, and they have no idea that the standard sports diet recommendations add up to that much sugar. And it's not much better for a marathon or a half Ironman. It's like 135 pounds because most of it's coming from the diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so back to you talking about your longevity, the other really sad and ironic thing, and I'll bring it up after, and we'll talk about, is as people age in sport, a lot of the things that happen, they consider normal. We've normalized all these things, and they're not looking at people like you or Bree or Peter or Andrea. I mean, look at Andrea Moore.
Right.
And they're not looking at them and saying, I want to do what they're doing. They think you guys are outliers when and here's the point. They think you guys are outliers, but you are what normal should be. And I always tell people, Jeff Browning is the model for OFM athlete. That's because you're doing everything right. You're doing your strength training, you're doing your intervals, you're doing your long runs, you're doing hills, you're doing the diet. You're doing it perfectly. I don't have the time to do it as perfectly you do, but yeah, I aspire to it. But like, you're the role model of it, right? Bree is the female role model of it, right?
Yeah, we're trying to be. We're trying to see what's possible. And I think had I not done this, I would have already been retired. And so I think that's an important point to make coming, out of 10 years of this. Had I not done this 10 years ago, I honestly would have gone the way of the retired ultra runner, where I'm trying to still be around the sport some, but I wouldn't be racing much. I wouldn't be racing hard, that's for sure. And I wouldn't be training hard. So for me, it's been a really cool experiment for 10 years because, and that's why I'm still doing it after a decade. I feel good. And I have gone back to higher carb in little seasons over the last 10 years, just short little windows where I kind of really loosen the reins, and I feel like crap. I don't feel good. I don't recover well. I gain weight really quickly, especially once you hit 50 plus, you gain weight like that. So there's two ways you're going to gain weight. And one of those is going chronically too low carb. So you're not signaling your hormones and thyroid and everything else that everything's okay. And the other extreme is where you're getting too many carbs per day or too many calories. Now, another thing that I just came across, and I don't know if you've come across this, and that is kind of as you age, probably mirroring the Randall cycle a little more. So if you're familiar with the Randall cycle of your body likes your fuel source to either be carbohydrate or fat, but not compete for each other. So as we age, we probably want to separate those fuel sources in meals. So what I mean by that is fuel separation method, which is the protein is a constant. This is really quick. Protein's a constant, but the protein style drives the pairing of the fuel substrate of fat or carbohydrate. So if you have a lean protein, you have a carb with it. And if you have a fatty protein, you have a low carb with it and you have fat. So fat can be added to that carbohydrate or to the vegetable or the low carb side, but you're mainly letting the protein source drive the fuel substrate pairing, and we'll stay leaner long-term, especially women. I found that the women in perimenopause in their 40s and 50s are really, their hormones are all so wacky during that phase that everything that worked in their 20s and 30s that to stay lean doesn't work anymore. And so fuel separation is a great tool. And if anybody's similar, wonders what the Randall cycle is, RANDLE, you can go Google it, go look at the Randall cycle. You can get a download of what exactly that is, but it's basically fuel separation method.
Well, and here's the thing that's easy for both you and the audience to understand, because it goes along with that. because I'm a biologist and I look at this through a lens of evolutionary biology. Well, when you look at foods that exist naturally, carbs are off on their own. They're low protein. The only food source that is got all three macros in it is milk. That's the only food source that so I'm a little bit different, that I recommend. I don't think we need as much protein if you do the protein right. And it's all about protein assimilation. You can get less if you assimilate more for muscle synthesis. And that is, if you break a fast with a protein and fat rich meal, it doesn't have to be keto level fat, but there has to be plenty of fat in it. And most natural protein sources have a fair amount of fat with it, right?
Yeah, most do, yes.
Most do. And so if you break a fast with a protein and fat rich cycle, you will optimize your protein assimilation. And then, like you say, keep the carbs separate most of the time, especially as you age. Now, you doing a carb sneak, like leading up to a race, it's not going to matter because.
Well, we say, like, on big days with fuel separation method, when I'm coaching that, one of the things that I recommend is like not worrying about it around big workouts. Like when you have big volume coming in or after a long run, like mix all the macros. It doesn't really matter. Those can be mixed
exactly.
Up. Bring the carbs in with the fat. It doesn't matter. But on easier days, rest days, off season,
separate them.
You want to be a little more strict with like separating those macros of carbs and
because if you do that, it's like, so what happens is you do that and glucose gets priority. So the glucose goes to metabolism, the fat gets stored.
Yes, the fat gets stored. Or if you have a ton of fat and then you add a bunch of carbs on top of that, once the fat metabolism is already kicking on and assimilating that fat, then the glucose just circulates in your bloodstream and stays in your bloodstream, which then is messing with your circulating blood glucose, which isn't good either.
That's something we didn't talk about, and I talked about this extensively with Dr. Edwards, is what people don't understand. Back to your thing about what's ideal in the bloodstream, like it likes 1 teaspoon of glucose.
Yeah, 1 teaspoon
right?
of glucose.
And you can handle, but one of the metabolic sponges for glucose, because glucose and ketones are highly toxic. They're fuel sources.
Right.
They're strictly fuel sources. And so that toxicity means it has to be regulated. And so what happens is this process called glycation, which is the glucose molecule attaches to different lipoproteins, which are cholesterol molecules, protein and fat molecules, and makes them really, really prone to oxidative stress, free radicals. And worse yet is if those lipoproteins are made up of your industrial seed oil, which are very, very prone. Your polyunsaturates, especially the manufacturers, that with glucose glycation there is like, you're just creating, and that's a way the body rids itself of glucose in the system, and it's going on. That's why they call it AGE, advanced glycated end products. Yep. Your HbA1c is a marker of that. And that's one of the other big things about OFM is if you can keep that glycation under control, because that's what people don't understand. If you're eating all these carbs all the time, that's a massive amount of glycation. It's a massive amount of inflammation. Yep. And this is what causes your cardiovascular system to go bad, literally. Yep. Again, this is another reason why I recommend high collagen foods. Is your epithelium in your GI tract and your endothelium, which makes up your cardiovascular system. Those are composed of the same kind of collagen-based proteins, and they turn over, like your epithelium and your endothelium, it turns over every 3 to 7 days. And your body can use old stuff, it can recycle, it can take other molecules of protein and make it into it. But if you're giving it collagen-rich foods, like I push that, like organ meat, you don't need too much organ meat. You need muscle meat and you need collagen. And people eat too much muscle meat. They don't get enough of the collagen.
Yeah. Good stuff, Peter.
Yeah. So what else? And then recovery. I remember when you were doing that debate with Ian and we talked about recovery. The recovery, you kind of got caught because you wanted to talk about that, because that's a huge part of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that recovery, it isn't really the protein, it's actually that beta oxid. If you're doing a higher rate of beta oxidation, you're not doing the damage you need to recover from.
Well, that's something we've talked about in the past, right? And we've kind of made a point of, is one of our theories is that, and this is backed up by, like, if you're burning fat, for every unit of oxygen consumed, you pick out an equal unit of CO2 when you're burning glucose. And when you're burning fat, it's like the average
2x, 3 times of oxygen.
Yeah, 1 times 0.75 of CO2, which means you're just doing less, you're doing less waste. So like less stress, oxidative stress to the system. And I think that's one of the reasons we see recovery. I think another reason, now this is my most recent like rabbit trail on edema, me trying to solve this edema thing I've experienced, is that this albumin mechanism of pulling fluid back into the bloodstream for filtration, right? Acting as that metabolic sponge at the beginning of this conversation.
Yep.
That I went off on. That, I think that's one of the reasons, one of the things we kind of really like coach our athletes to do is like, hey, after you do a 100 miler, when you're in that inflammatory phase of 48 to 72 hours, like that's when it's the most important for you to be like kind of carnivore keto, meaning protein and fat, mainly a little bit of carbohydrate. Maybe the first meal is okay to have some carbs, but like after that, be pretty strict for that window, and you will like flush all the swelling out. You won't have but part of it is that protein mechanism of albumin is not only are we not doing less oxidative stress like you're talking about in the first place during the event, but then afterwards we're leveraging OFM, we're leveraging our diet, our lifestyle diet to mirror what they do in trauma surgery. So I coach a trauma surgeon, and I coach one of my other coaches coaches a trauma nurse who I've gotten to know really well that lives in Phoenix. She comes up here. They have a second home in Flagstaff. So she comes up here and we have coffee every once in a while. And one of the things that we were talking about in this protein talk, we were talking about how when a trauma patient comes in, they are swollen everywhere, systemic inflammation. And they have to get that inflammation down. And the way
dude, I'm going to interrupt you. That's what I see when I go to Costco. All these inflamed people.
Totally. They just need protein, dude. Protein and no carbs. So what they do is they put you on a high protein IV. So that converts to albumin in the bloodstream. When the liver converts the protein in the bloodstream, it turns it into albumin that acts as the metabolic sponge and pulls all that fluid out of the tissue back into the bloodstream, and they filter it all out and start peeing it out. So like, it's like, this is what we're doing in OFM with this strategic timing of our carbs. We don't need the carbs after the race because we've had so many during the race, and we're trying to do less oxidative stress by doing less carbs per hour and relying on part of our fat metabolism for less oxidative stress. And then afterwards, we're leveraging our diet with lower carb for that inflammation window to flush all that fluid out if there's going to be any.
Right. And the thing is you not only, if you're fat adapted, after you have that first meal or two, you're not hungry. I mean, I really have to tell people, you need to eat. You don't need to eat much, but when you do eat, you got to make sure it's really nutritionally dense, because you're not going to be wanting the calories because they're so fat adapted. So it's got to be that protein and fat rich, super nutrient dense stuff, because they're just not going to eat much, right? It's like they can't, most people, when you get them converted, this, after a marathon or an ultra or an Ironman or whatever, they want to eat the house down when on high carb, right?
Oh yeah.
And then they can't believe that they're just hunger suppressed after. And so that combination of the protein and the, like you say, the sponge, plus the effects of ketogenic diet to get rid of the excess fluid, you start peeing out, like you said, that first race at Hurt 100, you were texting pictures to Jen of you doing air squats and
I wasn't even hardly sore, and I was like not swollen, and I'd always ballooned in my legs after the race.
You got cankles.
So I had cankles. It was crazy. And it would be days, like 2 it would be like 3 days of swelling before I would finally flush it all out. And what's interesting is after Cocodona this year, I had a lot of edema. So my issue, again, I'm chalking this up to one, I need to go more liquid, less carbs per hour for me personally, and rely on my fat metabolism because I know it's high, right? We've already talked about those numbers. But also I feel like I wasn't getting enough protein during the race, and that was like a detriment to my race. Like it messed me up, and I like, it ruined my last third. And that's it's on me. But you know, when we make mistakes or we
learn
short, we like, hopefully you learn from them, and I'm hopefully learning from it. But the point here is that after the race, I gained 18 pounds during the race. 18 pounds of fluid. Okay. Whoa. That's how bad my edema was. I mean, I walked the last 30 miles. I was like done. My gut was done. You know, I was like everything.
Dude, your wife must be like,
it was crazy.
Cocodona.
It was crazy. I had a fat suit on. So then I started like leveraging diet, you know, because immediately I have a habit of like high protein, you know, low carb after the race. And I did that. And I started like, you know, I started dropping some of the fluid, right?
Right.
But one of the things that happened is during that, because I was done with the race, I ate, like I had a couple of times where I didn't go high protein, high fat, low carb meals. I did kind of a carb meal or went crazy with a carb meal, one carb meal in that inflammation window when I had all that fluid. And it's funny, man, like you would shut off the flushing. Like as soon as I had a carb meal, no flushing. I'd hardly pee. I'd hold on to all that fluid that was still sitting around. But as soon as I would like the next meal, I was like, oh, I had all those carbs and I'm not like getting rid of any of this. I go eat up like, you know, eggs and bacon or steak and eggs. And then it would be like for the next 6 to 8 hours, I'd be peeing like every 45 minutes, like just flushing all that fluid. Again, albumin and no carbs. Because when you have the carbs after the race, it wants to hold on to the fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. But you know, the thing is you're sitting here at 54 and still racing competitively. Not age group, not just age group. I mean, you're going for the age group record at Western States and Western.
Yeah, I don't know if I can compete for the win at Western States.
Yeah. Western States has gotten stupid fast.
It's but I mean, like, fast now.
Like, and even Cocodona, when you know, like this year the conditions were good, right?
Yeah.
But I bet you'd still be competitive if they had that condition like they had several years ago. Where
Had I been able to execute the last third,
yeah,
I still would have been in the mix. Like when I look back at like what my times were, stop times, like the gut issues and the edema caused major implode from like how often I was I went from like being able to like, I just too much stopping, going slow, stopping in the middle of sections in between, because that tracker's tracking when you stop. So like that spot tracker is, so it really gives you like a after the race, you're like, whoa, 17 hours of stop time, which means I ran, even with hiking the last 30, I ran a 54-hour race.
Yeah,
hiking the last 30.
Right.
So like when you put that together in like 2024, when I got second, I only had 6 hours of stop time. Right. So you throw the 6 hours. If I would have just been able to execute on 6 hours of stop time again, I would have been at 60 hours, you know. And if I would have, you know, so like that, and if I hadn't been able to, and if I didn't have to hike the last 30, I could have just run it. Then like all of a sudden I'm running a 52-hour or a 51-hour race, you know, and then I'm at like 57, 58 hours, you know, so I'm in there in the mix. So that's why I'm saying like when you analyze it, like when we have these metabolic issues or something go wrong in a race, like I did, it really pays to solve whatever that root cause is. And that's really what we're doing with OFM. We're like digging into like the root cause of inflammation, of oxidative stress.
It's all like, metabolic.
It's all metabolic. And so, right. And so understanding like there's a balance there of like, how do we put all the puzzle pieces together to have a great race, you know? So It's really what it's all about when it comes to
it's fun, and it's, you know, you have the longevity, but it's not, you know, the problem is people get this messaging that 120 grams an hour.
Oh.
And they just go with it. And even, you know,
well, it's because the influencer factor. The problem now is the influencer factor. This is one of the conversations I was talking about with my buddy that I said I was texting with, and earlier in this conversation, one of the things we were talking about is like, one thing that rubs me the wrong way is this kind of influencer, like social media influencer factor that's come into like the race nutrition talk or like performance talk, is like they can just scream it from the rafters if they have a lot of followers. And then that gets like, that information gets pushed out and seen as truth, when it's like maybe not truth. Maybe it's like way off the truth.
Well, it's the truth for that athlete in that moment, right? They win that race, they did that thing. It's the truth for that, but for everything else, it's not. And you know, here we are with people like you at 54, still running competitively, living life well. You know, you're not on meds. I mean, you know, I'm 66. I'm not on meds, right? You're not on meds. We're not, you know.
Well, and I just had blood work after Cocodona. 10 days after Cocodona, my testosterone's almost 900. I'm not on any I'm only on NSF certified supplements, right? Because you'll get pushback from me on the whole NSF stuff, because I looked into that years ago before the FDA reclassified Vespa as a food-based beverage. But it's really a racket. It's really a racket. You pay but I mean, you do have to. I have known a couple athletes who got dinged for like cross-contaminated supplements.
Yeah, they were using something that was.
Yeah, they were using like a BCAA or some kind of recovery supplement or something that had something banned in it from like cross-contamination. Luckily, those people figured it out and spent money to go like sleuth it out. But and one person wasn't dinged like after the test, and that I know in our sport, and another person in triathlon was, and she took 3 years to go sleuth it out with her own money. Luckily, her husband had a really good job, but she lost all her sponsorships. She lost all her like professional status, you know, from triathlon because of it. So like for me, I've been very anal retentive about like what I'm taking, just because I want the highest quality stuff, and I want it to be at least third-party tested, so there's no cross-contamination, hopefully, and I can at least come into that study or into that, you know, into a P test after Western States, say, here's the supplements I'm taking, and here's the list, and you know, and I can hopefully with confidence be okay that way. And I think it's you know, I don't know if you've seen the thing with Sage Canaday and Cam Hanes, you know, but that whole debacle of you know, Cam taking BPC 157 for a foot injury and Sage turning him into USADA, like that's a debacle. I don't want to deal with that, and so that's one of the reasons that I'm kind of anal retentive about my supplements. But
so yeah, you know, I'm looking at this, and you are too. It's like, how can we best mentor and guide our athletes to be the best version of themselves, which means it may not, you know, and so I've seen the Wolverine stack, which is using BPC 157, do miracles for people's knees. And
or ankle rolls or something like that.
Right, exactly. And it's like, use it if you're injured to get better, because this is fine, but I say this is above my pay grade if you're going to use it for a performance thing. And I don't know if you know about this, but you know, this, one of my doctors I work with does sports, and he works with a lot of high level cycling teams. And we've kind of hypothesized that, the high carb thing and the Morton bicarb allows people to take in more carbs, but the performance you're seeing in the pro Peloton right now, there's probably some peptide stuff going on, because even though it's banned, there's no way to test for it.
Yeah, it's out of your system in 3 days. So and
and most of these peptides their cultured synthesized stuff of natural peptides. They're just upping the thing. Like even like the GLP-1 agonist is naturally is in your gut. And if your gut's working right, like yours is or mine is, it regulates your appetite. It's just when you take the GLP-1 agonist for weight loss, it's kind of like supercharging. And that's the same thing with the peptide. So a peptide, you could take it in a race and it would be metabolized. It'd be hard to detect. That's how hard it is. Right. So it's like one of those things where I don't know what Sage was thinking, but he was probably being a Boy Scout, but it's like he doesn't know the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to get into that conversation at all, but it is like that's the reason I brought it up, was just that I don't want to have that. I don't want to have a debacle in my own life. Right. I had enough run-in with Sage back in like 2016 when I did Hurt on OFM, and all I was doing was sharing my experience, and he went after me for going low carb and thought it was like dangerous. So like that was my last like interaction with Sage on a debate level, and I realized he was in his own bias, and I wasn't gonna like.
Yeah, you're not gonna convert him. Yeah.
So well, I was like not willing to have that conversation anymore with him because of that.
Well, and back to this whole thing, it's like and this is not bagging on people. I just want people to know you and I have been around the sport a long time. I've been around the sport since the early 2000s. And how many people have we seen come and go who are phenoms and dominate for 2 or 3 seasons, both men and women? And then,
I was just talking about Jeff Rose today with another athlete.
Yeah. Rob Carr, Jeff Rose, Ellie Greenwood. And it's like I say, it becomes what happens to them. People think that's just normal because they're a high level athlete.
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to. And that's my point, because these were, I've talked to Rob Carr and Jeff Rose, and they were, when they were first on the scene, and like great people, fantastic people. And it's like, but they just, they were doing what worked in the moment, and they weren't they just didn't realize what the long-term consequences are. There
are some long-term consequences to not getting enough macronutrients at times, or the wrong macronutrients.
Well, and even if you're getting the right macronutrients, if your metabolism isn't working, it's not going to process them properly, right?
Yeah. Or you're going to just get injured, right?
Yeah.
Over and over again, till at some point you just go, I give up, I'm out of the sport.
Or your autoimmune system, your immune system or your autoimmune system starts to kick in and all that. And I guess the way to kind of wrap this up is, like I say, whether people know it or not, we're all signed up for that ultra called life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and life's probably a little more important than your ultra running career. So
I mean, we both get it. If you're like Tom Evans or some of these, I don't even know who's at the top now. I mean, there's just so many fast guys coming on the scene.
Oh man, so many.
I get it. If you're going for the win, you're going to burn some matches.
Yeah. Some life matches.
Yeah. But I even with those people, it's like you guys were saying when we were doing that collection, what if people started doing some of the aspects of OFM, like on their recovery, going low carb?
Yeah.
Doing that. I mean, they could probably extend it out their careers a lot further. It doesn't take much.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Anything else you have to contribute to the audience?
Nope. That's it, man. We've talked a lot. Almost 2 hours.
I know. 2 hours and going, but
I got to go get a workout in.
Okay.
It's lunchtime for me.
Okay. Is your last long run Friday?
Last long run will be Friday. Then I start tapering. I'll be at TrailCon and speaking at TrailCon this year on Wednesday afternoon. And I'll be in Olympic Valley that whole week before Western States. So I'll see you in Olympic Valley next.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for being a wonderful example of what this can be.
Yeah. Giddy up.
Giddy up. Thank you.